Hello my friends, we're back at it again with Monsters of Folklore. This time though, as expressed in the previous video, the Plague Doctor is who we're going to be discussing this time. Now, he's not a monster, but it is folklore that is just creepy and scary, because if you think about, what the Plague Doctor was around was, the Black Death and all that stuff. That's some scary times back then. But I'm gonna be discussing, what all the Plague Doctor's outfit was, some of the cures that they thought would work, which is mind-blowing if you think about it today's standards. And let's just get right into it, shall we? Now, the Plague Doctor is arguably one of the most, iconic figures to have emerged from the Middle Ages. These were European physicians who specialized in treating victims of the plague, the best known of which being the Black Death. Whilst plague doctors have been playing, their trade since the Middle Ages, it was only after this period during the 17th century that they acquired their trademark costume. The outfit of the Plague Doctor is the most iconic, though a little bit bizarre, symbol associated today with the Black Death and the plague in general. Now, plague doctors, they were public servants hired by the villages, towns, or cities where a plague had struck. In theory, the primary duties of the plague doctor were to treat and cure victims of the plague and to bury the dead. Now, the plague doctors were also responsible for tallying up the numbers of casualties in logbooks for public record and documenting the last wishes of their patients. I don't think I'd have a last wish if I had the plague. Now, furthermore, plague doctors were often summoned to testify and witness wills of the dead and dying. It seems that most plague doctors were occupied with this aspect of their job. So I think what that means is the plague doctor was kind of, like somebody's power of attorney by today's standards. Like, you tried to speak for the person with the plague and all that stuff and is about to, be deceased. But, at times the plague doctors were even requested to conduct autopsies in order to better understand how the plague might be treated. Now, as plague doctors were in contact with the victims of such a deadly disease, they were at risk of falling ill themselves, and therefore had to take precautions that would minimize this risk. Prior to the 17th century, plague doctors wore a variety of protective suits. It was only in 1619 that a uniform was invented, which became popular amongst plague doctors. Now, the man attributed to this invention of this plague suit is Charles de la Orme. Now, I may have said his last name wrong. Now, the chief physician of the three French kings, and he was also in the service of the Medici family of Italy. As I was saying before, I might get some of these names wrong, but you get the drift of where this sailboat's heading. Now, Charles' protective suits consisted of several elements that were easily recognizable. For starts, the hat was worn on the plague doctor's head. This was made of leather and was meant to indicate that its wearer was a doctor. Although the hat served a symbolic function, it has been speculated that it may have provided some protection by keeping some bacteria away. The next item is a mask, which was bird-like in shape, had a long beak. According to one source, people once believed that the plague was spread by birds. Therefore, the use of such a mask may have stemmed from the belief that the disease could be removed from a patient by transferring it to the garment. Now, the mask also had a utility function, as the beak was packed with strong, pleasant-smelling substances such as ambergris, mint, or rose petals. Now, these were meant to ward the disease away, though we know today that would not have been effective whatsoever. If a disease is airborne, you're going to be getting it regardless. Now, Charles's suit minimized exposure of the skin with a long overcoat. The neckline of this overcoat was tucked behind the mask and extended all the way down to the feet. The entire piece of clothing was coated with soot or wax, which, according to one hypothesis, was based on the belief that it would either repel the plague from the doctor or draw it away from the victim. Alternative hypothesis is that the wax served to keep bodily fluids from sticking to the coat. In order to protect the lower body from an infection, Charles has designed his suit with a pair of leather breeches beneath the overcoat. Now, to me, wearing all this leather, you'd pass out of a heat stroke. But now, finally, a wooden cane was carried by the plague doctor. This tool served a variety of functions. For example, a plague doctor could use his cane to examine his patient without touching him or her. So it's going to poke you with a stick to determine what you have. This tool could also be used to indicate to his helpers or family members of a victim how and where to move the patient of the deceased. In addition, the cane can be used in defense against the assault of desperate patients. So apparently if you go crazy, he's going to get that stick and beat you with it, if I have gathered all this information correctly here. Now, it is uncertain as to how effective the plague suit really was. Charles himself lived until his 90s, which is pretty remarkable considering the age he was living in. It has been pointed out, however, that many plague doctors were not quite so fortunate and ended up being victims of the plague themselves. It is likely, therefore, that Charles's invention did kind of barely any to protect the wearer from the dreaded disease, because it was spread, the Black Death, the plague, was spread by rats. So, I mean, thinking it was birds and all that, they were going in the wrong direction from the beginning. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit about what some of their methods to try and cure the plague was, and some of them just seem dumb. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the suggested prevention of cures, how they were supposed to work, and what they actually done. Now, carry flowers or wear a strong perfume. This was supposed to, help by the smells, would help to ward away this disease. What it actually did? Nothing. Drink hot drinks. The victim would then sweat out the disease. What did that do? Nothing. Carry a lucky charm, because that's going to repel any disease, even AIDS. Now, the charm was supposed to ward off diseases. What did it do? Nothing. Use leeches to bleed the victim. This would remove infected blood. It did nothing. Smoke a pipe of tobacco. That can cure anything. The smoke was supposed to ward off the disease, but it did nothing. Now here is the two doozies that, goodness. Give a strong dose of laxatives. This would cause the victim to completely empty their bowels, thus removing the disease. What did it do? Strong doses of laxatives can cause death from dehydration, so you will make it one way or another. And the last one, which is just bizarre all on its own. Coat the victims with mercury and place them in the oven. The combination of mercury and heat from the oven was supposed to kill off the disease. Now, you could tell me what you thought it would do, but this could actually increase the likelihood of death. Mercury is poisonous, and the heat from the oven caused serious burns. Many doctors, knowing that they could do nothing for plague victims really, simply didn't bother trying to treat the disease, period. Those that did make sure they were protected as possible, though, from the disease by wearing the uniform that I have described already. And here's just a little bit more about the suit. I already told you about the beak, how they would try to stuff it with things that would just smell good from, the rotten flesh and all that crap. The leather hat was just basically more for extra protection for their head. The glass eyes, though, were built into the mask to make sure that their eyes were fully protected. And the mask was just more protection. The gown, it was made of like a thick material, as I said before, that was covered in wax, and underneath, they would wear leather, which, man, you'd be sweating to death if you had to wear all this stuff. Then, of course, the leather gloves is supposed to, keep the infection away. Then I told you what the stick was. Whew. But you could only imagine living back in these days, and if you're in a town and you see a plague doctor coming into town or whatever, your best chance would be to leave instantly. But in case y'all don't know, this is crazy here. There's been 3 cases of the plague, and I think Wyoming, this past few months, they've actually, I think, had 3 cases, but I'd say now it would be really treatable. But back then, whew, oh boy, you gotta think of the fun times they had back then. But this is a little bit about the plague doctor. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Tell me your opinions on the plague doctor and all that stuff. But I thank you, and I will see you later.